Today, you are going to finally understand the confusing world of USB cables. I'm going to show you how to pick the best one for your Fujifilm camera. Roll that intro. Hi everyone, welcome to Pal to Tech. Today we're talking about USB cables. So USB stands for Universal Serial Bus. And they were designed to offer a simple way to connect mice and keyboards and printers to computers. In fact, before USB came along, you actually used to have all of these various sorts of connectors. USB was designed to sort of do away with all of those different types of connectors and cables and give you one standard for all of the accessories. They have evolved significantly, and they've gotten a lot better over the years. And in fact, all kinds of devices, weird ones too, will work with USB. So that's the good part. The not so good part is the way that USB cables have been named, renamed, and recategorized. It is extremely confusing. So to fully understand USB cables today, you need to know the three main USB concepts: connector type, specification, and generation. Let's begin with connector type. Think of connector types as the physical design of the USB connector at the end of the cable. So there are 6 main USB connector types: Type A, Type B, USB Mini, USB Micro A, USB Micro B, and USB-C. Older Fujifilm cameras such as the X-T1 will use Micro A. Micro B is used by the X-T2 camera, for example, while the X-T3 uses USB-C. And the USB-C connector type is great because you can attach it using either side of the cable. The second USB concept to understand is called specification. Generally speaking, there are 4 main specifications of USB: USB 1, USB 2, USB 3, and USB 4. Each specification, 1, 2, 3, and 4, represents a significant new USB standard. And as each new standard is released, it adds faster data transfer speeds, better power management, and, in the case of newer USB cables, the ability to connect high-resolution monitors. In fact, when it comes to data transfer, USB really has come a long way. For example, USB 1 could only transfer data at 12 megabits per second. USB 2.0 increased that to 480 megabits per second. And this goes all the way up to now USB 4, which gives you speeds of up to 40 gigabits per second. By the way, if you don't know the difference between gigabits, megabits, doodlebits, Googlebits, whatever, just know that USB 4.0 is a lot faster than USB 1.0. The higher the number, the better a USB cable will perform. And also, if you use a higher specification cable, suppose you use, USB 3.0 cable, and you plug that into a system that could only handle USB 2.0, it'll still work, but only at the lower speed that's the 2.0 you're plugging it into. Also, with each new USB specification, it is not just data speed that's improved, but also how much power that the cable can provide when you plug it into your device. Now, as I said, there are 4 main specifications of USB: 1, 2, 3, and 4. For each main specification, there were also minor releases. So for example, after USB 1.0 came out, they made some improvements to it, but not enough to jump to USB 2.0. So they released USB 1.1. When the USB 3.0 specification was released in 2008, it had a speed capability of 5 gigabits per second. However, and this is very important, the connectors stayed the same, meaning that you can have 2 Type A connectors, say, but one of these could be the slower USB 2.0 and the other one the faster USB 3.0. Although they are identical, there is a blue color on one of them. You see that right here? The blue color means that this cable is USB 3.0 and can give you that 5 gigabits per second speed. different specifications, same connector. Does that make sense? But because this isn't quite confusing enough, not all of the connectors have a color-coded difference. You can actually have cases where you have a USB-A connector type, but has a black bottom. And with the black color on a USB type A connector type, this could either be USB 2 or USB 3. And so yeah, you can't even go by the colors. You have to go by the listed specs when you purchase your USB cable. So now we come to the part of this video where both logic and common sense completely fall apart. In 2013, USB 3.1 was introduced, and it was a big deal because it included a brand new connector type, USB-C. And when it came out, USB 3.1 doubled the speed from USB 3.0 to transfer data up to 10 gigabits per second. Now, because of the new USB-C connector type, and for a bunch of other reasons as well, the specification names were changed. And this is the final and third USB concept you need to understand: generation. So what happened was that the USB 3.1, the new 10 gigabit cable, it was renamed to USB 3.1 Gen 2. And the older USB 3.0 specification, the one with the cables that worked with the older USB-A and USB-B connector types and had those older, slower speeds of 5 gigabits per second, that was renamed to USB 3.1 Gen 1. But unfortunately, it was also still known as USB 3.0. Now, if you can believe it, it actually gets worse. And at this point, I'm going to need a drink to get through the rest of this naming convention. Oh. In 2017, USB 3.2 came out, and when it did, they changed the names again. They ended up with 4 separate versions of USB 3.2. The older USB 3.0, the one with the blue color that had just been renamed to USB 3.1 Gen 1, well, now it is called USB 3.2 Gen 1X1. And that subsequent 10 gigabit per second version that I just mentioned that had been renamed to USB 3.1 Gen 2, well, it was renamed again to USB 3.2 Gen 2X1. However, the just released brand new USB 3.2 was split into 2 generation versions: USB 3.2 Gen 1X2, which would support up to 10 gigabits of data, and USB 3.2 Gen 2X2, a version that could support up to 20 gigabits of data. Here's a chart showing the USB versions and generations together. Now you see that whole X1 and X2 thing right here? What is that? The first number is the generation. So this right here is Gen 1. Here's Gen 2. And the second number right here refers to the number of data lanes that are actually inside the cord itself. This cord would have 1 data lane and this cord would have 2 of them. And if you happen to have a cable that has 2 data lanes, well, you're in luck because 2 data lanes means you get double the speed. So let's put all of this together. Let's say you're pulling up the specs on one of these Fujifilm cameras right here. USB 3.2 Gen 2X1. From watching my video and listening to your Uncle Pal to Tech, you should know that it's the USB 3.2 specification, Generation 2, with 1 data lane. And if you go back and look at the chart that I showed you, you will see that this supports up to 10 gigabits per second. But let's now look at an older Fujifilm camera model, the XS10. You'll see that it still uses USB 3.2, however, it is Gen 1X1, not Gen 2, which means you're only going to get the 5 gigabit per second maximum data transfer speed. It can be really confusing out there with all of these different names floating around. Here's a USB-C cable that's 3.2 Gen 2X2. That's the 20 gigabit one, right? That's the good one. That's the fast one. However, if you go to this page right here, while the connector is still the same USB-C, right? Looks the same. In fact, this cable is only USB 2 Type-C. A lot slower. You see how confusing this can be, and you really need to know the old names and the new names right now. Eventually, maybe in a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20, they will stay with one naming convention, and I won't have to make another video like this. And finally, we come to USB 4.0, which has an official data transfer rate of up to 40 gigabits per second. The other thing you need to consider is the length of the cord, okay? As the cord length gets longer, voltage starts to drop. So if you use a USB 3 version cable that's longer than 3 meters, you may see slower charging times for your devices. In fact, with the USB 4.0 specification, the length of the cable actually needs to be shorter, and I recommend a cable under 1 meter in order to get the full data transfer rate. Keep in mind that new and more powerful USB 4.0 cables are already coming out, and they will be able to handle longer cable lengths. In fact, by the time you see this video, they may already be available. So be sure to check the specs before you purchase one. Now, one thing I didn't talk a whole lot about was power, and that could actually be its own dedicated video. So what you want to look for when it comes to power, if say you have a USB specification cable, is something called PD, or power delivery. And you'll usually see it listed in the product info, maybe in the title here or in the specs. USB power delivery is also available for USB 4 cables as well. Now, one other thing. I did not cover a cable type called Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt cables, especially Thunderbolt 3 and Thunderbolt 4, require their own dedicated video on the subject. You can tell if you have a Thunderbolt 3 or 4 cable by the little lightning bolt on it. You see that right here? And the important thing to know is the connector on a Thunderbolt 3 or a Thunderbolt 4 cable, you can connect into any USB-C port. In fact, the performance of USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 are very similar. However, keep in mind that if you do plug a Thunderbolt cable into a USB-C port, some USB-C ports will not support the full range of the Thunderbolt features. But as far as Fujifilm cameras are concerned, both Thunderbolt 3 and Thunderbolt 4 will work just fine, as long as your camera supports the USB-C connector type. So which cable should you get? Well, all things being equal, and if your budget allows it, I'd go with USB 4. And I would get the shortest cable that you think you need now and in the future. I will leave a complete list down below in the description of this video of my suggested cables that I think would be great for Fujifilm cameras. Remember this, the naming, the versions, the generations of USB-C 3 and USB-C 4 cables are currently all over the place, and you will definitely still see the old names everywhere. So be sure to read carefully and know what you are getting before you purchase. If you made it this far, congratulations, because this was a lot of technical material to go over in a short amount of time. However, I really hope that you come away from the video with a better understanding of USB cables. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you found the video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. I'm going to be signing off now, but have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you in a new video next week. Take care. Now I gotta go put all this stuff away.